We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Do you ever feel like you're living in a box? Like there's a set of rules or beliefs or walls around you about what it means to be a man, and you're stuck in it, even when it doesn't feel right. If you've listened to the Mankind podcast, you've heard us say before that some of the beliefs we hold about ourselves as men that we learned early on might actually, are likely, keeping us from real power and agency. And they're also likely hurting people, sometimes in ways that a lot of the guy culture out there actually endorses. Today, we're diving deep into a conversation that will challenge these walls. I'm talking with Will Adolfy, a psychotherapist in the UK and a men's coach who knows firsthand about the pressures, the expectations, and the hidden wounds that men carry, sometimes without even knowing it. Will's not only worked with men and boys in schools to help unpack this stuff, but he's really lived it. He lived deep in the so-called Manosphere in the red pill community, and he was under the influence of figures who promote some certain ideals of masculinity, some of which are really not very healthy. Will's journey is about breaking out of the boxes, about taking responsibility and finding a healthier, more grounded way forward. So if your world is giving you messages that maybe some of the beliefs you're boxed into are no longer serving you, and if you've ever felt like there may be a gap between the man you are and the man you really want to be, not just for you, but for the people around you and for your relationships, stick around. This conversation might have some of those keys to getting unstuck. Welcome to the Mankind Podcast. This is Boysen Hodgson. Today, I'm with Will Adolfy, and I am incredibly excited for this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and maybe something that we don't go directly at on the Mankind podcast all that much, but we are going to be talking about the manosphere, about the red pill community, about these kind of influencers in the men's world out there online, especially. Will is a BACP qualified psychotherapist. He's a coach, founder of the 30-day men's program, supporting men on their journey to healing and self-discovery. He's got over 6 years of experience teaching in schools and is really familiar with what young men are going through in the classroom and in school these days. He was a professional student mentor specializing in supporting boys with ASD and ADHD. We might even talk about that a little bit, helping them develop essential self-regulation skills. He is a dynamic speaker, a workshop facilitator, dedicated to raising awareness about masculinity, men's mental health, and empathy at schools all over the UK. Will also runs workshops for staff and parents where he equips others with the tools to navigate critical issues such as online misogyny and the influence of figures like Andrew Tate. He's the author of an upcoming book called Beyond the Manosphere: Why I Took the Red Pill and How I Broke Free. Will, say hello.
Hello, Boysen. It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we have a couple of intersecting connections. The first one is Chris Hemmings. So Chris Hemmings has been on the podcast a couple of times, once with me, once with Brandon, and founded a program called Empath in the UK, working with boys in schools on lad culture. Go back and listen to those episodes and check that out. And then there's been additional work around this idea of the manosphere and how young men get trapped and hooked into this kind of influencer culture, influencer lifestyle. So I think that's where we're going to start. How did you get drawn into that culture? Give us your story on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I look back, how I make sense of it is there were certainly a number of contributing factors. There was a lot going on at the time that I found myself watching the content I was watching. And I would say, without starting the story from the conception of my birth, because that would be a bit too much of context,
Wow.
but it does go back into childhood, with not having a connection to my dad and spending a lot of time at school trying to be someone I wasn't. And we use the word man box. Paul Kivel coined this term,
Yep.
and also a man called Tony Porter, who I'm sure you're aware of, and maybe some of your listeners are. But we use that when we go around the schools because it's visual. And it is this idea that there is these rules that we have to follow as boys and men that are in the box. And rigid masculinity is another way of describing it. And so I definitely spent a lot of time at school really trying to match up to that. And I actually pretty much got expelled when I was about 16. There was a lot of violence I was caught up in. I could even share a little bit about that, but it was essentially
Tell us
me
the story.
really. Okay. The one I tend to tell is on the last day of school, when it was prank day, I decided to bring in a rope that was big enough to tie up a boy probably twice over. And in my mind, this was for banter. I am English, by the way, so if there's any US listeners, I understand there might be a bit of lingo, but it was maybe banter's one that you guys understand. Do you understand that, Boysen? Banter?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. For some reason, I thought that might be UK related, but there was a lot of banter going on, and I thought it was banter, and I brought in this rope, and I got all these other boys from my year to join in with me in. We were going to tie up another one of the lads 2 years below, and it was going to be for a laugh. And when we were doing this, fortunately, one of his friends interrupted, diffused the situation, and I was able to get through that experience without having harmed anyone physically. It was a real shock looking back. I was wondering what was going on that day. What was I caught up in? And the school, they decided that they were pretty much done with me. After that experience, I denied everything that happened. And in hindsight, it definitely was me trying to appear tough. And so I spent a lot of time trying to appear tough, and it was a way of masking what was going on with me at the time, which is something that I'm still experiencing today, which is a kind of chronically overworked nervous system. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah.
Growing up, spending a lot of time in fight or flight. And yeah, we touched this and we can probably go into it a bit later, but I still feel that today, and I felt it back then. But obviously back then as a teenager, I didn't have any awareness. I didn't have any tools, any support. So this was my way of coping. And if we fast forward, then we go into kind of early 20s. This is when things get a bit interesting because my mental health started to disintegrate rapidly. So it got to a point where I was having panic attacks every day, and I was going through severe bouts of depression. So I remember one moment I woke up and just going to the fridge and opening up the fridge just took so much strength. And I was working as a teaching assistant at school, and I was doing my best to keep acting career going. And I was working as running a theatre company. So I worked in a very politically left-leaning space, theatre, but not just like mainstream theatre. This is like off West End, off Broadway would be the US version. And at this point in time, I was finding it hard to leave my room. The one thing I had really was my work. And at this point, I actually, if you had asked me, are you a feminist? I would have said yes, because this was before all the Manosphere stuff started for me. And I was very much just not even thinking. A lot of people pleaser stuff going on, just didn't really want to get involved. Everyone around me was saying they were a feminist. I'm a feminist. Yeah, I'm just going along with it. Don't want to get involved. Too scary. I've got so much unresolved within me that any sort of conversation around that stuff was just too much for me to even get involved with. And then something happened. There was a lot going on at that time. This is when 2016. So we're talking Me Too movement. One of my friends dressed up as toxic masculinity to Halloween party. I was at an event once where I was with a couple of friends, 2 guys, and a couple of women were with us as well. And we were sat in the audience, standing up at a gig. And then I went to the bathroom. I came back and I couldn't find anyone. I was like, where is everyone? And then I went to the other room and I said, guys, what happened? And they said, we were standing in the audience and the lead singer of the band said, women and non-binary people to the front, men to the back, and started screaming, men to the back, men to the back. And so these are just an example of some of the stories that I really started to develop this worldview that people hated men. That's what it felt like at the time. That's how I experienced it. And so I think all of that was started to play. Other experiences as well started to develop this view. And then one day I was listening to a podcast, and I'll never forget this moment. I was on my way to the gym, and it was a Joe Rogan Experience episode with a man called Jordan Peterson. I'm sure some of your listeners, if not all of them, would have heard of Dr. Peterson's name. And
for sure,
his voice just completely captivated me. And this is coming from someone who at that time found it very hard to concentrate. I'd find it hard to sit and watch a movie. There was a lot that was unresolved within me, and just any sort of moment where I was left and not moving, or there wasn't this kind of fragmented sense of concentration, I would feel uncomfortable. So here I am, the first time ever, I'm being engaged by a podcast. So that's part of it, the medium of it. I was able to work out and walk whilst listening, which really soothed my nervous system. But the way in which Jordan Peterson was articulating himself was also captivating. And he described the story of being at an event in 2016 where there was a male feminist who looked him in the eyes and he saw something else. And he was describing how this person wasn't aware of what they were doing and what ideas they were subscribing to, something like that, right? I'm paraphrasing. But that really was the first time where I remember looking at myself going, oh, I think I'm that guy. I've got some ideas that I haven't examined myself. And so that was the start of me just completely listening to everything Jordan Peterson had to say, whether it was podcasts, his biblical lecture series, videos online. And then it led to me watching intellectual destroying or owning radical leftist types, right? And that's the actual phrase that Jordan Peterson would use. Yeah. So then I would watch those videos for hours and hours. And we're talking like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Milo Yiannopoulos. Those were the 3 guys, David Goggins for other things, less sort of political stuff, but more self-help. A lot of it was self-help. I think that's what I would say right now, is that at that time, because my mental health was so poor, what I was looking for was guidance. And it finally felt like I had some guidance, because it really did feel, and I understand how it can feel this way for so many boys and men, that the world hates men. So when I was listening to all this content, the message I was getting subliminally was, we care about you. We see you. We know that these communities, and I'm being very specific here, the woke, quote unquote, what I considered woke and politically correct and feminist, they hate you. And
that language is very explicit.
Yeah. Very explicit. And it lined up with some of the experiences that I was having. And I went online on Twitter and I would see all of these sort of comments, and I started to really believe that the world hates men and that I was not a part of any of those communities. And so I didn't want anything to do with those communities because it felt very activating. It would activate my defense system like so easily. I remember my partner at the time, I went to go see one of her shows, and it was a drag king show, right? So it was women dressed up as men, and it was a real kind of roasting of patriarchy in the show. And sitting there feeling like uncomfortable being in the audience, almost like I imagined everyone was looking at me like, oh, there's that white straight guy up there. What's he doing here? This is an LGBTQIA plus sort of vibe. You don't match that. I don't even know if that was occurring. This was a good few years ago now, but that's what I thought was occurring in my head. And I remember afterwards, someone said something. One of the women said that men have it easier than women. And that was always a massive activation point for me. And it was that feeling of being unseen. Yeah. And there's plenty more. Is there anything you want to jump in on that? I've told a fair bit.
That frames something, that frames the scene so well. And just because my listeners aren't seeing your face, I also want to, so this was 2016, 2017. How old were you and how old are you?
I'm 30 right now.
Yeah.
So in 2016, I would have been, I actually have to do the math myself, about 22. Yeah. So would have just left, been out of university for a year and really just trying to, feeling that kind of sense of feeling lost, not really much direction, which so many of us undoubtedly feel when we just leave university. And yeah, 22, 23.
So I'm going to pull on a thread here, which is coping mechanisms. So it sounds as if some of where this came into your world and how it filled a gap for you was you didn't have many coping mechanisms to help regulate your nervous system. You didn't have many kind of support systems out there just telling you in a very basic way, I see you, I feel you. Talk more about what it was like in your body to actually be getting that kind of validation from the outside.
Relief. That is the word that comes up. Just complete relief. Just like that's how I would describe it, watching this content. And I still, like, a part of me is still there. I can still feel that when I research Andrew Tate or when I see like any content that feels like it's got that sort of anti-woke energy to it. I still have a part of me that feels that sense of, oh, it would be fun to just swim around in that for a bit, that relief and that kind of sense of belonging. It's like it's like a belonging, but I have belonging now. And I have that in my support groups and my friendships. And I didn't have that at the time. So you're so right. It really was a case of me being alone in my room, and not just alone in my room, but when I was around others, I also felt alone because I just hadn't gone through the process of opening up and starting that process of expressing myself and trying to make sense of what was unresolved within me. And it was very confusing because it really did feel like everything was just and right. The way I describe it is Jordan Peterson gave me a dragon to slay, and that dragon was feminism. And I had no idea that I had so much deep-seated fear and hatred of feminism and woke culture in particular. And watching this content, it fueled that. And at the same time gave me that sense of belonging, that sense of, oh, okay, I have someone I can look up to as well. And the way I describe it is Jordan was my internet dad. I had a painting of him on my wall. And in every conversation, I would always be quoting him. And my friends used to mock me for it a little bit. They would be like, all right, mate, could you go on about my therapist at the time? I remember him saying, it sounds like you're talking about your dad. And I started to realize that at the time. I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, I do deeply care for the idea of this man because I hadn't met him. I still haven't met Jordan. So he filled up the way I describe it is my psyche was a collection of voices from what was being called the intellectual dark web. So Rogan, the people I said, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And I would hear quotes in my head. So it felt like this. The online world became my inner world. So when I would leave my house, I would be expecting a radical feminist to be lurking on a corner waiting for me. And so I would be like, I've got to fight this. And I would memorize everything that Jordan had been saying about the gender pay gap. I would watch his interviews of him destroying quote unquote other people, other radical leftists. And yeah, just hours and hours of watching this content. It really did feel like I was living in a world where I had to be ready to fight for men. And I was stuck in that. I really didn't see it at the time, but I really was stuck in that. And it definitely impacted my relationships now that I look back. At the time with my partner, I just couldn't chat to her about gender. I couldn't let in her experience as a woman because it felt so threatening to my belief system. And this is the thing that actually really makes sense to me now is it's not a rational thing. It's an emotional connection that I had to Jordan Peterson. And as so many of the boys have to Andrew Tate. If you come with a piece of information that may be true and rationally makes sense, you are threatening my emotional connection to Jordan. If it's something, and like, for example, because Tate, obviously, they're very different. And we could get into that if you want, the difference between Peterson and Tate, just from my perspective and research and experience. But one of the things you could say, and there is a story, this is a true story, of one of the teachers going up to the boys and saying, if Andrew Tate gets found out for what he's being charged for, which is sexual trafficking, would that sway your opinion of him? And he said, no, miss, he's family. And when family go under, I'm paraphrasing now, when family go under, you still love them. And that's exactly how I felt about Jordan. So it was near impossible to have an actual conversation with someone who has a different worldview, who's part of a different group, because I just felt on a subconscious level that was just too threatening to what I was getting at the time from having a father figure and having a sense of belonging and a sense of a place to go for relief from a world that hated me. That's how I experienced it at the time.
There's so much rich stuff in here. So I start thinking about, you didn't have a father figure in your life. There are so many of us who that was our experience. We either had dads who weren't fully present, dads who weren't there at all the divorce stories, all of the kind of things that we have. So there's a kind of attachment to a male figure, father figure. There's neurological stuff just about your nervous system, right? Soothing, being soothed. It becomes a self-soothing mechanism to be able to listen to a voice that you become comfortable with, who's telling you that you belong, who's telling you that it's okay, all of those kinds of things. As you said, the emotional experience, the non-rational experience of it. And then our psyches will create relationships in the absence of relationship. So even though you weren't having a conversation with Jordan Peterson, you were having a relationship with Jordan Peterson, which was probably different than most of the relationships you had experienced in your life, right? And that becomes a comfort.
Yeah, really great point about the comfort. The voice itself was comforting, and there was a lot going on via osmosis. So it wasn't necessarily what was being said, but it was the way in which it was being said, the manner in which it was being said, the imagery of Jordan online and at these events where people were trying to shout him down. And yeah, I would definitely love to touch. I guess it makes sense to go through where I am now with all of it as we go through the journey of it. But yeah, at this point in time,
the reframe.
Yeah, exactly. The reframe. I really do have compassion for why so many men are finding themselves watching this content. I really can understand it. Like, it really does feel like the world hates men at times. And the way I see it now is that did become a distraction. Like, watching the content gave me a short-term solution to my predicament, but in the long term, my mental health did not get better. And that was one of the main reasons I was watching that content, was my mental health was worse. I wanted to get better. I wanted to improve it. And the way I describe it is a father-like sense of authority and care from Jordan in particular.
Yeah.
And I read his book, 12 Rules for Life. And I was listening to the David Goggins stuff, bit Jocko Willink, all of these guys. And the messages I got from it were build a business, be disciplined, build a business, go to the gym, lift weights, and make yourself into someone of value so you can get a partner, someone else that's valuable. And I really did my best. And obviously it's not just them saying this, it's also society, right? The films we've been watching, parents, a lot of it's unconscious, schools, we're still delivering these messages in our society, I believe. And yeah, it's very prescriptive, isn't it? It's very much do these things and you will belong. And it wasn't just about being a man, it was about being a competent adult and a man, but actually feel that sense of belonging. And I remember there was one time where the business was going really well. I was going to a gym and I finally had veins on my bicep and I felt really pleased about that. And then there was also, I had a girlfriend. I found someone that actually liked me. And I remember walking down the street once and that feeling of loneliness and my default kind of place of just low grade sort of discomfort or sadness. Again, I didn't have a reference point at the time, so it just felt normal to me. Obviously now looking back, I can pick it apart a bit more, but yeah, that went. And I remember in that moment walking down going, wow, dude, I'm doing it. I'm doing so well. I've got this business. I've got a girlfriend who's, at the time, the dialogue in my head was she's fit as well. And I used to go to parties and my mates be like, wow, is that your girlfriend? I'd be like, yeah, that's my girlfriend. And that was a huge part of it. It was like, oh, I'm a somebody. Relief again. I'm a somebody. I'm a part of something, part of society. And I didn't realize it, but that was built on such a kind of like a fragile foundation because it was my self-worth. It was all tied to my self-worth. And yeah, eventually lockdown came, business crumbled to the ground. I broke up with my partner at the time and it just got so exhausting trying to maintain this fitness regime. And yeah, eventually I was back to my emotional home as I've heard it being described before. The feelings that I was just very familiar with. And that led to a kind of breakthrough moment, which we can maybe get to.
Let's definitely get to that. And I want to underline healthy adult behavior, right? But if all of the healthy adult behavior, as you said, is built on a very fragile foundation of only if you do it this way, this hard, this long to get this, to get that, to get the other thing, right? It's like a commodity thing. It's a commercial thing. It's a transactional thing rather than a being thing.
I read a book. I don't know if you heard of this book, but it's called Towards Manhood. And it's by Larry Pesavanto. I think I'm pronouncing his last name right. In it, he describes the script of patriarchy. And I'm very conscious of using that word just because my work is primarily speaking to boys who went down the same path I did. And that word is very loaded. And it's it can shut down conversation like that, as it did with me. Any sort of word that like male privilege, toxic masculinity, patriarchy, all of these words, as soon as I would hear them, I'd be like, I'm out. I'm not involved in this conversation. Like, I'm out. So patriarchy is one way of looking at it. Man box is another. I tend to use that word, which is an aspect of what people regard as patriarchy. But patriarchy is a very complicated term and it gets thrown around a lot. And I've seen Jordan Peterson get very angry at people using that word. And I've even seen clips of him denying its existence. So the way I see patriarchy is, to me, it's a system of rigid gender norms for men and women. So for me, at the heart of patriarchy is that kind of rigidity around that box, around how we're meant to be and our place in the world.
We're thrilled to have BetterHelp as a sponsor for the Mankind podcast. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist for live one-on-one sessions, someone trained to listen, support, and offer helpful insights. If getting one-on-one support feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to betterhelp.com/mankind and get 10% off your first month of therapy.
And in this society, the patriarchal script is something like this. You become a man when you get a job, a salary. So ideally 3 figures. You get a house, a car, a wife, and children. And there's other things as well, but simplistically, that's the patriarchal script, quote unquote, of what we get told. This is how you become a man. And so to some degree, I had inherited that script from my dad, and I was acting it out unconsciously. And so at a time when this script was being deeply challenged by society or woke culture, quote unquote, or feminism, people that were online saying there's nothing wrong with this script's fine. I was seeking like huge relief from that. I was like, oh my goodness, because otherwise I'd have to go through a process of challenging or self-examining myself. And I really wasn't ready to do that. So it was really like useful for me to have people go, hey, there's nothing wrong with the script. But also it's not useful as well to have people saying that we need to throw away the entire thing, because that is unrealistic as well. So we'll get to that later about what we can do. But this script really made sense to me. I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I've inherited. That's the patriarchal script or the man box script. And what I was calling out for in some way was an initiation into that being that you're talking about. But that's quite abstract. And so I want to try and help people understand it a bit, as I did, because it was the script that we've inherited is an outside in script, right? So it says, if you do these things on the outside, you will then change how you feel on the inside. But we've got more awareness now psychologically of how actually neurologically, emotionally, on our nervous system level, how it actually works, and how, yes, those things may give us a moment or two, or even 6 months, a year, 2 years. But at some point down the line, something's going to happen to you emotionally that you're unaware of, that is connected to how you are living your life. And I was fortunate enough that my desperation emotionally happened before I had acted out that patriarchal script. With my dad, it happened later. He and my mum, they separated, or they got divorced when I was 17. So I've had conversations with him now, which has been incredible. And our bond has never been stronger. And it truly is amazing what is beyond the Manosphere. And we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He's been telling me about the script, the cost of it, the cost of working 9 till 5. He's just retired now, and he called me up for the first time the other day, and he actually had energy, and he was like, come over and I'll support you and help you on that thing you're working on. And I was like, whoa, that's never happened before. So yeah, there is a real cost to this script, and I had to go inside out. And what does that look like? Well, we can talk about that now, because there's lots of things we could say about exactly what that looks like. But ultimately I see it now as an initiation into maturity. And that's what Larry calls it in his book. He calls it an initiation into manhood. And a lot of other cultures, they have these initiations. There's extreme examples in African cultures where tribes, they have 3 aspects of it: a separation. So you separate from the village of comfort, the village connected to your mother object, your mother. You separate from that and you go on a journey, you go on an adventure away from the village, and you go through the second part of it, which is an ordeal. And in this ordeal, you will have challenges, and you'll be spending a lot of time with yourself. You're away from distraction. You're facing yourself. You're facing your feelings. And in going through an ordeal, you then return, that's the third aspect, to the community, having learned something and grown from this experience, so that you have something to give to the community. And so that's the framework that a lot of cultures are still loosely holding on to. And we don't have that. We don't have that in this culture. We just don't. And I know that's a huge part of, this is why I've been drawn to MKP and now your work with your the Weekend Warrior Project. Is that what it's called?
The New Warrior Training Adventure, which is a modern initiation into emotional manhood. Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's it. And yeah, at this point in time, I didn't realize I was doing this, but I had a friend, a dear friend, a best friend who I was very fortunate enough to have. And I was going through this process of separating from what became my mother object, which was my partner at the time. I just couldn't separate from this person. I would break up with them and then get back together, break up, get back together. And then they call it the kind of toxic tango in some recovery circles. This kind of can't live with you, can't live without you. And I was really caught up in that dance for a whole year. And by the end of it, the fifth time we got back together and broke up, my friends couldn't believe it. They were like, why are you going back there again? And I was like, no, I've changed. The mind kept playing tricks on me. I'm going to go down the same path again. And I think it's going to be fine this time. And but at this point, I got exhausted and my bravado broke down. And I said to her, I'm only happy when I'm with you. Or I need you to be happy. That was it. I need you to be happy. And it was the most truthful thing I think I'd said to that person at that time. And I was exhausted and desperate. And they call it the gift of desperation, when my suffering overwhelmed my fear of change. Have you heard of that phrase before?
Yes. Yes. We do some speaking about kind of recovery in here. And yes, the gift of desperation. Thank you.
Really resonated with that when I heard it. And then my friend said to me, sounds like you need to go away and spend some time on your own. And I remember like that hitting me in my gut and me just being like, whoa, that's scary. Spend some time with myself. And that's what we're talking about, this initiation of turning inward, going inward, instead of searching for things outside of me to help me to cope and change who I am. But for the first time going inward. So I decided to book an Airbnb for 7 nights, 8 days. I brought nothing with me apart from a couple of books, a book by Anthony DeMello actually called Awareness, which was an incredible book to read at that time. Every word started to really hit home. I had an iPod with a podcast by Naval Ravikant on, who was talking about anxiety. And I had a journal. And I just decided to go there and just spend my days meditating, walking, and just was going to put my phone and my laptop down for the first time ever. At this point in time, I was watching YouTube videos. I was a big time gamer, nothing against gaming at all. At this time, I was using it heavily to distract myself. And I was watching YouTube videos of gamers. I was watching lots of content online. And I would watch movies and YouTube whilst eating. I was just constantly thinking about what was going on, what was happening next. I just was deeply unhappy. And I hadn't awoke to that yet because my attention was so externalized.
Yes.
Rather than internalizing it. So on this retreat, it was the first moment when I started to really understand how unhappy I was. And I remember calling up my mum going, oh my God, Mum, I'm so unhappy. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I was like, no, I feel invigorated. Because now I know. It's so interesting to just go back and I can just really feel that time in me right now. And I wrote so much on that journal. I had some clarity in that space. Oh, I need to train to be a therapist. And that was the start of that. And I need to just put my smartphone away for 8 months. That was one of the guys. Well, it wasn't 8 months. It was away for 8 months. But I just really knew I needed to continue feeling my feelings and going in deeper and getting support. And so I started to open up. My heart broke, but it broke open. That's what I've been saying. And I started to be receptive to what was going on. And there was one day in particular where I was having such a hard morning. And I was walking through the park and this man came up to me and he asked me whether I believed in God. And I said, I don't think so, but I'm starting to believe in something. That was that opening. Something's going on here. I don't know what. We had a chat about 15 minutes. He gives me his card. He was recruiting for a Bible group. And I took the card and went, okay, cool. And I walked off and I had Spotify Weekly on, Discover Weekly, that playlist. It gives you new music.
Yep.
And I remember listening to a song and the lyrics went, for those seeking a new beginning. And at that point where I heard the lyric, I looked down at the card and it said, "For those seeking a new beginning." And I just freaked out. Like I went, whoa. And that was like my first moment of like synchronicity that I'd heard people talk about. And yeah, it was just a moment of synchronicity that I decided to attribute meaning to it. I went, okay, I've got an opportunity here. That means I'm going to be okay. That is a sign from the universe that actually I'm meant to be here having this experience. And so in that moment, it really helped me to make sense of it. Now, I kept going back to being disconnected and not trusting anything, but this was a moment that I hadn't had before. And then there were other moments, and just more and more I started to just experience these moments, then go back to my disconnection, then come back to this moment of connection. And I joined a 12-step recovery group, and it was in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous that I really started to face my resentments and my fears around feminism, around woke culture. And that's when the transformation started to happen.
Yeah, let's talk about the transformation. That's a great segue. So we're doing all of these psychological concepts here, and one of them that keeps popping up as you're describing what it was like to be in that world is projection, right? So projecting our own sense of self-loathing out into the world, projecting our own sense of inability to have a sense of identity outside of externals out into the world. And when I get into conversations where there's a real anti-whatever, anti-feminist, anti-rightist, anti-leftist, anti-whatever, like so much of that is rooted in a very simple concept of projection. Jungian, right?
Yes.
What I hate in myself, I project onto the outside world. So start talking about what was it like to actually start listening and hearing and reframing this blame, the projection that you had been doing.
Yeah. So I went through this program of recovery and I started to meditate. I started to go deeper with a new therapist. The big thing for me was I abstained from my addictions and then replaced my addictions with support and recovery and literature and breath work and all of this other stuff. And physiologically, I started to notice, this is really crucial, I started to release what was unresolved within me. And that created space within me. And I don't mean that on an abstract level. I mean that physiologically, I felt lighter. I was waking up in the morning doing breath work and just all this trapped rage was coming up. Lots of tears, so many tears. Just a release of all this stuff that had been in me from my childhood, and just lots of all the things that had happened to me as a child that I hadn't processed. All the heartache, everything was there. My divorce, there's lots of other stuff as well. And it just started to release bit by bit. Some of it did, a lot of it did. And that created space. And then I was going into non-judgmental spaces. And that's key, non-judgmental spaces where I suddenly felt able to speak about what I was noticing within me. And in getting it out of me, I could start to make sense of it. And some of it just it just needed to be said once or thought once and noticed once. It went, but other stuff lingered around and it felt like it needed more time to be expressed and sat with. And that really started this organization process of releasing things and expressing. And I just started to feel stable. So I actually stabilized. And in my schema of looking at things, there's 4 modes of being. The first one is the lowest mode, which is angst. So that's when people are close to suicide and are in a crisis. The one up above that is survival mode. And that's where people are doing everything they can to get through life. They're activated a lot of the time in fight or flight, and they're trying to get through the day. And above that, we have stability. And this is where there might not be too much kind of joy, but there's stability. There's a sense of I'm managing things. I'm okay. How's everything going? Yeah. It's that energy, stability. And then above stability is thriving. So that's how I currently see. And you can jump between modes, but a mode tends to be where you spend most of your time. And I was spending most of my time in survival and then dropping down to angst at certain moments. But this was the first time ever that I had gone up to stability and stayed there. And it's very common in recovery circles to stabilize and then think, all right, I've got it. I've got the answer. This is it. I've nailed it. I'm so happy. Oh my goodness. I was happy to be stable, but I still wasn't happy. And I'm still on that journey right now of moving towards thriving, moving towards that kind of happiness. I had stabilized. And so that's when it became easier to approach aspects of me that I really didn't like and needed that sense of support and stability. And this is what a lot of people that are calling for men to do this work, it would be really possibly help the situation if they had that understanding of what it takes, what someone needs to actually do the work, to actually see what is within us. We can't do it on our own. That's what I believe. I don't think I could have done it. I needed support. I needed a group to lean on. I needed friends. I had a sponsor that is such a dear friend to me. I love this man. And he and I went on this journey that was still very close. And a key moment, Boysen, was step 4 and step 5. So for those of you that don't know, step 4 is where you take a personal inventory. So I wrote down every resentment I ever had, every fear I'd ever had, every harm I'd ever committed, let's say. And it took about 3 months for me to write everything down. And it was a really tricky process. I was writing down all these things. I could just do 20 minutes of time a day. And then I sat in a room with him for step 5, and he completely listened to me for over 30 hours. Which when I think back to it, it's just incredible. This took us 2 weeks. The final session we did was 8 hours long. And it was in that room with him. I can really just feel my gratitude coming up right now as I'm thinking about this. Because in that room with him, I, for the first time ever, was addressing so much that was unresolved within me. And one aspect was just how difficult I found my childhood at times. I'll never forget this moment. I was describing going through all the stuff that happened in my childhood, some of the violence, some of the tough moments. And I just said it, and I wasn't connected to it emotionally. I just read it out because I was still in that kind of minimalization of like dissociation kind of stuff, which I needed to do.
Yeah.
When I looked up at him and he was just crying. And I looked at him and then I could see me in his tears, my younger self. And I started to cry for that younger self. And I started to cry for my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister, everyone who was caught up in that suffering. I started to have compassion for in that moment. And that was because he was present with me and was accessing his empathy for me. And it just opened me up. And I started to get in touch with just how deeply impacted I'd been. And I started to pull away from the minimization and the dissociation. I started to get in touch with the grief and the heartache, get in touch with my inner child, as they say. And that was just a complete sort of, just a moment, a beautiful, important moment. And alongside the feminism stuff, I started to go through my hatred of feminism. And for the first time ever, I had someone who was listening and not adding to my resentment with a resentment of their own. And that's what I see happening a lot online, which is a lot of influencers are adding to other people's resentment because their own unresolved resentment is working its way into the message, the communication of the message. So I'm only going public.
Say that again.
So a lot of what I see that is going on right now with influencers like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, even Joe Rogan, like I even see it with Joe Rogan. And I'm not saying that these guys are wrong and that if you listen to them, you are wrong, because I have to make that clear because sometimes that can come into the message. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that they are human. And because they are human, what was happening with me was and what I see happening with them is that their own unresolved resentments is working its way into the message that they are communicating, which is therefore activating other people's wounds as well. It's activating the wounds of the men that are being called to the right towards women and feminism and radical leftists. And it's activating the wounds of the women and the people that are part of maybe minority groups who have been deeply harmed by rigid masculinity. And so we have this polarization going on. But it's understandable how popular these figures are because there are so many men who were in the situation I was in, who don't have support, who still have this barrier shame that's been internalized around opening up. And we can't go through the process of self-examination, which is what is needed to heal, without opening up. So there's a huge barrier to opening up, but there's another barrier as well, which is there's a lot that's unresolved within the left activism as well. So I call it wounded activism, wounded feminism, wounded men's rights movements. There's woundedness on both sides that I'm seeing. And so I got caught up in the men's rights stuff. And it's understandable why boys are being called to that side, because the right is saying, we see you, right? Mm-hmm. So if you feel unseen by society, the right's saying, we see you, come this way. And the left is saying, women, minority groups, we see the damage that the man box has caused to you. And so they feel seen, right? But both have blind spots that are helping us keep stuck in the polarization. The right's blind spots are the damage that the man box has caused, because, hey, it's caused a lot of damage. There's no doubt about that. And I'll get to that in a sec, because I started to see that when I did my step 4. I started to see what I had been caught up in through my own socialization. And it blew me away and it shocked me. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, wow, some of the stuff was, and again, I don't use these words necessarily because they can be inflammatory, but a lot of it you could have said, wow, that's misogynistic. You could have used that word to describe what I was noticing within me. Both have blind spots. So for me, the right's blind spots is they don't acknowledge the damage that traditional or rigid masculinity has caused. And I see this in figures that I admire on a lot of levels. Joe Rogan, I see it in most of the influencers, to be honest, that are that popular. Andrew Tate, of course. Jordan Peterson, I see it a lot with. I see it with David Goggins, although he tends to stay in the fitness realm. But a lot of these guys, I still cherry pick from, because I'm at a point now where I can critically think. But before, when I was engaged in this content, I wasn't able to critically think. And it's even more confusing because Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate are advocates for critical thinking. So it's very easy to think that I was critically thinking back then, but I wasn't. Everything was going in one ear and it was staying in and it was truth. And so now I can critically think a bit more. I can understand that there is something here that a lot of these influencers, I believe, are missing, because it requires that sense of self-examination to go through and start to see the ways in which we've been caught up with. And it's an uncomfortable, challenging process. And at the moment, what's happening is a lot of men are getting caught up with the wounded activism that's coming from the left, which is a distraction. It gets in the way of healing, because we can focus on that and be like, this is wrong and that, because it's not perfect, because any wounded activism is going to activate wounds of other people. So it's not activism, or it's not helping in the way that it's intended to. But on the left, the blind spot is that boys and men are under pressure. The boys and men are also harmed by the man box, right? The boys and men need as well support, and that spaces for boys and men aren't a threat to spaces for women and girls. These are some of the blind spots that I'm identifying now. So I see myself, I'm going public now because I feel like I'm just about ready to get involved in the conversation as someone who has been in the Manosphere space, come out of it, and now has an understanding of where the resentment towards the man box is coming from. And that is the thing freed me of my resentment towards the resentment that was coming from the left. It freed me of it. And a big part of that was understanding where it was coming from. And so in step 5, my sponsor said to me, I think he didn't fuel my resentment. Like I said, he said, I think you need to go away and you need to explore this even more. He encouraged me to go deeper. And I remember I went into my room, I was on my own. And for the first time ever, I gave a voice to my resentment. I wrote in speech marks, this is my resentment, what it's saying. And it said something like, I can paraphrase, I'm more than just a straight white man. I need you to see me for what I am. I'm more than that. I just want to be seen, something like that. And I then took a breath. I looked back at it and I thought, oh my goodness, that could be any person calling to be seen.
Yes.
Any person. And in that moment, I started to realize, oh, I have something in common with these people that have become the enemy in my mind. And so I then remember chatting to a woman who identified as a card-carrying feminist who said that she liked Jordan Peterson, but also thought he was a misogynist. And that started to confuse me. And I started to have these conversations with people that didn't fit these categories.
Yeah.
And my worldview started to expand. And I started to realize not everybody hates men. And that fact that if someone says they hate someone, it's actually their stuff. So that helped me go, oh, that's their stuff. They've clearly been through some experiences, just like I was. I'd gone through some experiences to have that hatred in me. So I started to have compassion. I became friends with a non-binary person. And I remember the first time I became friends with them, I remember saying, I'm so scared to misgender you. And they went, oh, it's absolutely, I get that. Absolutely fine. Don't worry about that. And I worked through that fear with them. And then I said, I'm still scared. And they said, actually, I'm scared of you because I'm not a man. So I'm scared of what you're going to think. And then I started to realize, oh my goodness, we've got this fear. We both got this fear of the other that's definitely being exacerbated by what I'm seeing online and this worldview that I had before. But when we moved through the fear, it was a human being. It was this human being. And we both wanted to just connect. And it really just helped me to feel more comfortable and familiar with speaking about gender and speaking about these things. Before, if I mentioned Jordan Peterson, I would go in a public setting, I would be on edge because I thought I was going to get shamed.
Yes.
And that's why a lot of the documentaries that I've been involved with, they struggle to find Tate supporters because there's so much shame around this. This is happening within an echo chamber, metaphorically and literally within the rooms of where I was staying in my early 20s. It happens within a room on a virtual screen. I didn't really want it to leave that space. I couldn't speak up on it. So now I feel ready enough to get involved in the conversation because I've done enough work on myself, enough shame healing and awareness of the nervous system, as you're saying. Now it's still a real challenge. Like I had my first bit of hate mail the other day. And so I'm leaning on my support and chatting to people like you and just really wanting to get involved, but also look after myself at the same time and I'll finish on this. I'm aware of just how easy it is for my own unresolved stuff to work its way into the message that I'm communicating. And I've learned from Jordan Peterson because part of what he's doing, speaking to men, showing care for men, I love that aspect of it. But there's a whole other aspect of it that I believe he is unaware of how polarizing it is.
Thank you. That's all. Yeah, beautifully said. The easiest way to get somebody to avoid doing their own work is to give them an enemy to go attack. And we're all doing it on some level, right? And that's part of the recognition and the wake-up call to all of us is anytime I'm saying, yeah, they hate you, I am doing the thing that makes it worse, right? I'm creating the environment that makes it worse. Yeah, beautiful. And I have had my own, people couldn't talk to me about Jordan Peterson.
What's that?
2 years ago, you couldn't talk to me about Jordan Peterson. I wouldn't talk about Jordan Peterson. No, I'm not going to talk about that. Blah, 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 blah. And now I've got it's healing. It's my own internal healing, right? It's a similar thing. It's like Jordan Peterson has said some really beautiful things. Jordan Peterson has offered a
Mm,
lot of really good advice and wisdom and
yeah.
frameworks for understanding. And the 12 Rules was a good book. It's not original.
Mm,
There's not much in it that's original, and it's a good book. But
mm,
yes, it's the unresolved stuff that gets into the message. Um, that gets into my message. I'm sure my own unresolved stuff gets into the way that I put myself out there. But that's the work, right? So can we find, and here's what I'm going to take away from what you said. Can we find non-judgmental spaces?
mm.
Can we find people who will listen and reflect with compassion so that we can start to have empathy for ourselves and our own struggles?
Yeah, that's it. I think that empathy is so important because, yeah, and I have empathy for Jordan Peterson. It's must like
Yes.
getting that big and popular. In my view is that it's not normal for a human to have that many eyes and ears on them. And
Mm.
I know that I would find that incredibly difficult. Um, And so, yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that is the work, just checking my unresolved stuff. And because it's still there, it's not like it's just
Mhm.
gone and I don't feel the old resentments that I had when I hear someone that's in their own resentment towards man box stuff. It's still there. I just, like I said, I have that more awareness over it now. And my intention is to bring compassion, to bring to bring the heart into a space that needs it. And this gender space really does need men, grounded men, to go in and speak from the heart. And if there's, and come back to that place of groundedness and just work out what's going on and bring in that empathy and that compassion because there's a lot going on for both sides. And
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully we can work towards bridging that gap because I want children one day and I would love for them to feel able to have conversations and to be able to express themselves and think because that's where the transformation or the world view expands. It's in conversations where I don't feel like I'm going to be judged, where I feel like I can be challenged because that's different. Being challenged, I still have my autonomy intact. I'm going to challenge you. So yeah, you're right. I think Jordan Peterson, there are certain things I still lean on that he said. There are certain things he says today that I like. There's a lot of things that he says around patriarchy. And like I said, this blind spot around looking at the damage it's caused, I think would be really helpful if we can have a conversation. Jordan, if you're listening, I'd love to have a
Yeah.
conversation with him about that. And yeah, that doesn't mean that it's wrong to listen to him. And I know that a lot of people feel that way, particularly when I actually am challenging him in some ways as well. And even Andrew Tate, let's go there, just to finish on this. During my research, I listened to Andrew Tate for 3 weeks and there
Mm.
was some of the stuff he was saying that was like, yeah, self-help stuff around working out and
Right.
direction and taking your destiny into your own hands. It felt like it was giving boys, and that there was a part of me that was like, yeah, man, great motivation, giving that sense of direction and motivation. And obviously, there's a lot more as well. With Andrew Tate's overtly damaging, you can hear that. There's a lot of clips that he's said stuff that is damaging. However, it's nuanced. And so I'm trying to bring that nuance into the schools and equip staff and teachers with yeah, just a bit more understanding and compassion with what's going on with the boys right now, why they're being drawn to the spaces. So yeah, I'm hoping my story helps in some way.
And it seems like the place where you're coming in is also a really affirming and validating place for young men who are through their actions like, right, let's just look at the behaviors or coping mechanisms. Let's look at what they're asking for through their behaviors. They're asking for someone to challenge them into a sense of discipline. They're asking for someone to challenge them into kind of learning executive function, how to choose for themselves, how to shape their own reality, how to feel good about themselves and their body, how to, like, there's so many aspects of this that are like, I'm just going to use an archetypal, like, fathering. They're crying out for fathering. Can we give that to them in a way that is healthy and non-damaging to others, right? Outside of kind of toxic competition or dominance hierarchy. Can we provide that in a way? Yeah.
And that's exactly, I resonate with everything you're saying, because if I could if I could bring it down to two words, the Manosphere, I would say father wound. Those would be my two words.
Yes.
And yeah, at the moment, we're not having that conversation because don't get me wrong, we're getting in a lot of work with Empath, the company that I run now with Chris, or run the schools department. That's great. However, it's still seen as a threat, this work, in some ways, understandably, because there's a lot of men's work that is rooted in a wound. And so it's still being conflated with that wounded men's movement, let's say, something like that. And yeah, there's a lot of work to be done around this conversation, how we can guide or father, and to some degree, our boys towards what we're learning now about mental health, what actually improves our mental health. However, it's not prescriptive yet. What is prescriptive is do these three things and you will be a man, which is get a girlfriend, go to the gym, get big and ripped, and get a business. The old patriarchal man box script. That's very prescriptive. It's easier for a 14-year-old boy to understand. So healthy masculinity needs a map. And that's what I'm trying to do with my book. It needs a map of some sorts for people to work with and throw away or tear apart and make their own. It needs something, because at the moment it's something like meditate, meditate and see a therapist. That's what it is at the moment. And not everyone wants to see a therapist. Therapists can be really, as a therapist myself, it can't,
Right.
it's not necessarily accessible to a 14-year-old, 15-year-old boy. And so it needs all of us to, as we are doing right now, having these conversations to try and figure out what's working, what's not. Because in rejecting patriarchy or the man box, we don't need to leave it all behind. We don't need to leave it all behind. And that's what a lot of boys need to hear. They don't need to throw everything out. But for example, opening up vulnerability currently isn't in the box. And we need that to be healthy. So do you want to be healthy? You're going to need to figure out what that means for you and what that actually looks like. Because it doesn't just mean going to a therapist. It can be really basic, sort of just baby steps. How was your day? Bit tired in the morning. That's just an example of something I never said to my mum when I was 14. Fine, it's fine, it's fine. Because again, and I understand there's other factors going, and this is a simplistic way of saying it, but what I want to just get across is that opening up was super important and is super important. And also we have a job to do as people working in the space, which is how can we communicate healthy masculinity in a way that is digestible? Because at the moment, TikTok content is such a powerful way of communicating ideas. And maybe it is that we need to hop on that bandwagon in some way, because the more kind of triggering content does get the most eyes and ears. That's the way the algorithm works, right? So I've often thought about how might someone be a sort of healthier masculine version of Andrew Tate? That's gone through my mind. I'm like, is there an influencer we can get who brings comedy into it? Let's have a laugh. Like, how can we bring healthy masculinity into comedy? But of course, these words, they don't mean much at the moment because we're still working out what that actually means and what it looks like. And yeah, that's the work for us at Empath anyway right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Will, we've gone for a bit, and so I'm going to bring us to a close. And I want to make sure that I leave you the last words look for Will's information in the show notes. All the websites will be there, links to Empath, Understanding. You'll get all of that stuff right in the show note. What is it that you want a young man What is it that you want an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 16-year-old to hear from you?
Firstly, I would say it's not your fault. Yeah, I would just start with that. I'd say it's not your fault. I know that it can seem like it is, and that there's a lot of messaging around that, but it's not your fault. And it's not feminism's fault. It's not woke culture's fault. And I say that because I want you to be healthy. I want you to feel alive, to improve your mental health. And if you want that too, what I have learned from my own experience is if I get caught up in the blame game and I point my finger outward, then I'm not going to be able to give myself what I need to heal, to get support, to start the process of understanding me and my emotions and the way it works. And in doing that, you can be more noble. You can have more self-respect. You can have more a kind of empowerment within you around your feelings and your emotions. You can be all these things that you still on some level want to be. We're not throwing all of those away, but you can get there in a way that actually helps you to embody those things rather than portray them on the surface. And when you are at that place, man, oh man, and I'll say this word unironically, you will have a lot of power.
Yes.
A different type of power to patriarchal power. You will have a power that not a lot of men, at least in my experience of the world right now, and not a lot of boys have. You will have a deep confidence, a security in your masculinity, the feminine parts of you, and you will be inching closer and closer towards a life of just love, one that's worth living. Yeah, say something like that.
Will Adolfy, everybody. Thank you, Will, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.
Hey, it's Boysen. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.